Welcome back to Curious Counter. That was the one rule stressed by our principal before leaving. See, at the end of 11th and 12th grade at my school, right before graduation, our school had a huge weekend trip for the students. 4 days, Thursday, Sunday, in a beautiful cabin resort. In the winter, it acted as a ski resort. But during the off-season, it wasn't uncommon for schools to rent out the whole resort for a weekend. Although usually rented by preppy private schools, the owner's founders were the in-laws of our principal. So we've gotten a massive discount the last 13 years our principal has been here. The place was big enough for my entire school, so we were stoked that we could have it all to ourselves. 320 of us went. Only about 20-30 kids stayed behind. It would have been 321, but a kid I knew, named Chase, got pulled out last second by his mom. Why this trip was so special for us was the lack of chaperoning. With so many kids and only 10 teachers going, we were essentially left on our own. We had a group chat that only teachers could text in through our school's grading app. We could also message each teacher privately in case of a question or emergency. We all packed our luggage into the buses at school after saying bye to our parents. Right as we were about to leave, our principal gathered us around to make his yearly speech. How he was proud of us, how this is a big moment, etc. He reminded us of our assigned lodging and said the most important rule was, under no circumstances, should we leave the resort and go into the woods alone. Not at night, not during the day, never. This seemed obvious, as we would be too busy running around and having fun to care about the woods. Luckily for me, I got lodged with my best friend, Ray. Me and Ray were practically brothers, so us lodging together made sense to us. On weekends growing up, we practically lived together, especially during summer. The room next to us was occupied by Leah and Maggie. Maggie was basically Ray's mom, always taking care of him and cleaning up his messes. We all knew he liked her secretly, but she wasn't into him like that. Leah had been my childhood crush. We went to school dances, movies, roller rink, and carnival, not dates together for years. Anytime someone accused us of liking each other, we would yell no, of course not. This year, however, if someone asked one of us if we were dating, we'd say, I want to wait till graduation, then we will. Our rooms being right next to each other was the talk of the school. She was the popular cheerleader type, and I was the class clown who had a massive glow-up last year. We were, in the words of my art teacher, a match made in a confusing heaven. The drive up to the resort took about 3.5 hours. Me and Leah sat next to each other, listening to music and watching YouTube videos the whole way up. When we got there, all of us were in awe of how massive the resort was. It looked to be the size of an amusement park. There was a pool and hot tub, a movie theater, a giant field bordering the woods. There were multiple buffets and restaurants, ice cream parlors, and even a bar. Me, Ray, Leah, and Maggie all walked up to our rooms. We got rooms right over the slopes with beautiful views of the mountain and surrounding forest. We even had our own balconies looking over the 850, 4-foot drop of the mountain. We got up there around 5:30, so we all decided to go grab dinner together. We chose the buffet and had some of the best food of our lives. I don't think we'd ever felt this grown up before. Later that night, Ray let me know he was gonna go hang out with his teammates from the football team. I knew that meant he was probably crashing on someone's floor, so I told him that I'd tell a teacher he went to the bathroom when they came to check before they went to sleep. There were 2 or 3 teachers on each floor who would do a sweep around midnight before lights out. I messed up his bed sheets and threw a pair of his clothes at the foot of his bed to make it look like he'd been here all night. At around 11:30, one of our floor's teachers knocked on our door, and my plan worked perfectly. 5 minutes later, another knock came, and when I opened it expecting it to be Ray, caught by a teacher, I was surprised to see Lee. She asked me if I saw Maggie after dinner, and I said she was probably watching over Ray, who's gonna be out all night. She asked if we could hang out before she goes to sleep, and I said yes. We laid down in pajamas and watched one of our favorite movies, Pulp Fiction. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, Ray barreled into the room. Bro, Stevie, guess. Wow. I'm guessing me and Leah fell asleep around the same time, because we woke up next to each other. Geez, way to wait until graduation. Anyways, you two aren't gonna believe this. What, Ray? I said, full of embarrassment. Okay, well, first off, I won't tell anyone about this, he said, waving his hand towards us. But last night, I was with the football team, right? And we were outside at like 2:30 throwing the football, and all of a sudden, we heard whispers coming from the woods. Sure it wasn't the wind, asked Leah, half awake and still startled by Ray barging in. That's what we all said. Must be the wind. Until we heard it start saying Josh's name. I'm no wind expert, but I don't think I've heard it make J and she sounds before. I even heard it whisper my, yeah, that's weird. Did you guys figure it out? I asked. No, not yet. Tonight, we're gonna go out and play football and see if it happens again. Okay, does that mean? I started to ask. Yup. You two lovebirds get the room to yourselves. See ya, guy. Wait. Leah sprung up out of bed and ran over to Ray. Did you see Maggie at all? Oh, yeah. She was with us last night. She left early, though. No idea where she is now. Me and Leah woke up and decided to go on a run, half spending time together, half looking for Maggie. We ran around the edge of the resort. At one point, we both stopped. We swore that we had heard someone whisper Maggie's name. We looked around, but no one was there. When we got back to the lobby an hour later, we saw Maggie sitting alone in the buffet area. We walked up and tried talking to her, but she just sat there, unresponsive. She had the 1,000-yard stare, but this was scarier. The whole energy around her just felt off. We ran into Josh later that day, and he said Maggie got super freaked out by something and ran off around 2:00 in the morning. We asked him about the wind next, and he seemed to become uncomfortable just thinking about it. I wonder if they're related, said Leah. Who? I asked, very confused. I was too focused on the chicken parm I ordered for dinner. Not who. Dummy. The two events. Maggie getting freaked out and Josh hearing his name. You saw how freaked out he was. I could hear her starting to get a little spooked herself. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? All I know is, under no circumstance do I want any part of that. Just then, we saw Maggie from where we sat at the restaurant. She was walking outside to the field. I assumed she was going to meet up with Ray again, so we decided to try and catch up to her. When we got out there, she was nowhere in sight. Creeped out by this, me and Leah decided another movie night was in order to calm us down. We got back to my room, laid down, and started watching Pirates of the Caribbean. After the movie was done, we went out on the balcony to enjoy the last few moments of the sunset. Looking around, something caught my eye. Leah, do you have your camera? I was hoping she brought it with her to the balcony to take a few pictures. She always loved capturing those type of moments. Yeah, why? Can I borrow it real quick? I asked. She gave me the camera, and I zoomed the lens to see it clearer. My blood ran cold as I saw someone standing in the middle of the forest, looking right up at me. My hands started to shake, and I couldn't get a clear picture. Stevie, what is it? You're scaring. Quick, zoom in right over there, I said, pointing towards where I could see the person. Leah almost screamed, so I knew I wasn't seeing things. She calmed herself enough and steadied her hands and got a clear picture. When we looked at the picture, we saw Maggie. Her skin was pale as a ghost, and her eyes had trails of blood streaming out of them. It took everything in me to not throw up my chicken parm. When we looked back, she was gone. We quickly raced to find a teacher, but none of them believed us. Pranks on teachers were common on the trip, especially about the woods. They said we have security cameras on every gate out of here. We would know if someone left. Plus, I don't even know who that is. Frustrated, we decided to go back to try and find her again. When we got back to the balcony, we weren't able to find Maggie. We did, however, see Ray, Josh, and the football team arguing. Josh and Ray seemed to be yelling at the rest of the team, trying to get to a wall that leads to the woods. "Shit, we gotta go," I said. It seemed Leah read my mind, because within 5 seconds we were sprinting down the 3 flights of stairs to the lobby. We didn't bother waiting for an elevator. When we got out to the field, Ray and Josh were closer to the wall. The team was the only thing that stood between them and the wall. "Ray!" I shouted. "What do you?" "It's no use," shouted back one of his teammates. "They aren't responding to anything." "Get out of the way, you asshole," yelled Josh, punching another teammate in the jaw. This led to 3 of them rushing Josh and Ray, but the 3 went down in the blink of an eye. I sprinted over to Ray and tried to grab him, but he shoved me to the ground hard. "Back off, you dweeb," he shouted. As I was getting up, I saw Josh had started climbing over the wall, and Ray was getting ready to follow. In an act of adrenaline-filled stupidity, I tackled Ray to the ground. He, being about 3 inches taller and twice my weight, pushed me off with ease and jumped up and started climbing. Josh had made it over at this point, and Ray had just reached the top. In a last-ditch effort, I started climbing the wall. Leah shouted for me to stop, but there was no use. I wasn't about to let my best friend do something, so... "Stevie," I heard a voice whisper, "you are not invited. Not yet. Leave." I shook it off, resisting the ungodly strong urge to turn back around, and kept climbing. I reached the top of the wall. Just as I did, I heard the loudest roar ever. My ears were ringing from the volume. This was enough to scare off the team, but not Leah. She climbed up right after me. We could see Ray and Josh below us, a mere 10-foot drop. Right as we were about to go down to get them, we heard a rustle in the woods. That's when we saw him, or it, standing 7 feet in height with muscles the size of my head, walked out a man. However, the hood that hid its head was horribly misshapen. When it pulled its hood down, I screamed. It had the head of a ram with 2 massive yellow eyes. Its mouth bore fangs sharper than anything I'd ever seen. Ray looked at us, tears in eyes. I could tell he wasn't in control, but I could still see my best friend, my brother, trapped in there. After yet another roar, it ran towards them and snatched them, dragging them into the woods. Their screams filled the eerily quiet air, and I watched in horror as it threw Josh down, lifted Ray up, and bit down on his neck. It dragged them out of sight, and the eerie silence returned. Me and Leah ran back inside, bursting into our teacher's room. When we explained the situation, the teacher looked confused. She told us that there were no Maggie, Ray, and Josh on the trip. In fact, the only Maggie she knew at this school graduated 3 years ago. When we showed them pictures, she had no idea who they were. The same went for every single teacher and student. The team had no idea who Josh and Ray were. The teachers never recalled having them in their classes. Everyone had forgotten about them. Everyone except me and Leah. The rest of the trip, Leah and I cried together. We wondered how everyone forgot they existed, and how many students had been forgotten in the past. We just stayed in my room, hugged each other, and never let go. When we got home, Ray and Maggie's parents didn't show up. When I went to Ray's house, his family claimed to not know me, and claimed to never have a son named Ray. Leah and I officially started dating after the trip. I think it was the tipping point that made us realize we needed each other. While the world forgot about our friends, we didn't. Leah was haunted by fear, but I was enraged. I'm writing this on the bus up the mountain. It's been a year since I watched my best friend get murdered brutally. Despite Leah's pleas, I'm going on my senior trip, and I'm going to find the beast that killed Ray, and I'm going to make it hurt for what happened. I resisted its whispers before. I know I can do it again. I just hope Leah doesn't forget me if I fail. I can't help but remember what it said. You are not invited, not yet. Have you seen those stupid little TikTok trends that have been going around lately? Yeah, no. The ones where on a person's 18th birthday they can choose between two different abilities. And the choices are some stupid shit like being able to see how much money a person has in their bank account or being able to see if someone is your soulmate or not. Well, guess what? I'm the poor sap that has to live with one of those abilities in real life. I can see how old a person is by the shiny white numbers that float above their head. It's not glamorous or cool. Okay, I take that back. I'm a blast when I go to the county fair and hit up the Guess My Age stall. I'm being sarcastic if you couldn't tell. My ability is pretty much useless and downright annoying sometimes. I mean, how is a guy supposed to save the world just by knowing how old somebody is? What I'm getting at is being able to see people's ages is more of a nuisance than a superpower. The numbers are pretty blinding and my attention always gravitates to right above a person's head, even if I'm not trying to. Now imagine how that looks to the pretty girl you're talking to, and all they can see is you staring just slightly behind them. I've gotten one too many slaps in the face for doing that. I wasn't always a freak, though. There was a period in my life when I was a normal kid with a regular childhood. The seeing people's ages thing happened after the near-death experience I had when I was 10 years old. Thankfully, nothing too traumatic happened. I just got stung by a bee and almost drowned in a pool. It was the end of summer and my parents were hosting their annual back-to-school BBQ. Everyone had just gone inside to escape the sweltering summer heat and eat some good food, as good as my salt is, but as my salt is spicy white parents could whip up, that is. I stayed outside to play by myself a bit since I was the only kid there. It was always my parents' friends and a few extended family members who went to those parties, none of my friends. The party was mostly for my parents who were just celebrating having made it through another summer with me. It's not like I was a bad kid or anything, though. Or maybe I was, and I'm just remembering things differently. Otherwise, maybe I wouldn't have almost died. I was 10, so my parents didn't worry too much about me playing out in the backyard by myself. After all, at that age, I was supposed to be a big boy. Anyway, I was out by the pool playing with some random toy when a bee suddenly landed on my hand. The thing you should know about me is that I'm deathly allergic to bees. Like carrying around an EpiPen in my pocket at all times allergic to bees. I froze when I saw it, too scared to do anything. The bee must have been in a bad mood that day because it decided I was a threat and stung me, even though I hadn't done anything. I swatted the thing off my hand as a hot, searing pain started to radiate through my skin. I stood up after freaking the hell out, as I could feel my skin puff up and the sensation of my throat slowly starting to close. In my panic, I hadn't been paying too much attention to my surroundings. One misstep later and I plummeted into the deep end of our in-ground pool. At least the water was refreshing enough to cool the heat flooding through my veins for a quick second. In that quick second, I remembered the existence of my EpiPen. I frantically grabbed for the life-saving medication in my pocket, feeling what little air supply I had left in my lungs quickly leaving me. My heart sank as I realized my EpiPen wasn't in my pocket anymore. My vision was starting to blur and had become dotted with a bunch of little stars around the edges. I desperately searched around me in the water as I continued to sink deeper. Finally, my eyes landed on the white, blue, and orange pen. Resisting the immense urge to breathe in, I reached out for the EpiPen. The first swipe, and it was just at the tips of my fingers. The motion, however, made the pen sink farther away from me. Some bubbles came out of my mouth in a grunt of frustration. That wasn't good seeing as that breath out was about 50% of the oxygen I had left. With all my might, which wasn't much since I was so oxygen deprived, I managed to swim down and grab the EpiPen. By that point, my vision was almost completely black and my lips tingled something fierce. Blue to the sky, orange to the thigh. I'd thought to myself as I uncapped the thing and stabbed myself in the leg, praying the medicine would work underwater. After that, all the fight left me and everything went black and numb. Obviously, I didn't die. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today typing this out for you to read. I awoke in the hospital about 2 months later where the doctors informed me I was less than a minute away from dying when I was rescued. Thank God my mom had a gut feeling and went outside to check on me. To this day, she tells me it was just a little too quiet in the house and I had a bad feeling. Mom found my EpiPen floating on the surface of the pool and my body at the bottom. She jumped in and managed to get me back to the surface where I coughed up most of the water I swallowed but stayed unconscious. Turns out my brain lost enough oxygen to go into hibernation mode or something, causing my body to enter into a comatose state. It took 2 months for my brain to get its shit together enough for me to get its shit together enough for me to handle consciousness. You'd think the worst part about coming back from a coma would be all the therapy that came after it. The physical therapy to learn how to walk again and regain control over my limbs. The speech therapy to learn how to talk again. The actual therapy where I had to express all my feelings towards what happened to me. Yeah, all that bullshit sucked ass. Don't get me wrong. To me, though, the worst part was everybody asking me what it was like to be in a coma. I'd constantly been berated by the nurses, doctors, and even my parents about what I remembered during my extended slumber, which, by the way, wasn't much. It was mostly black, nothingness. The only thing I vaguely remember was a dream. There was a garden, big and ethereal, like every plant conceivable to man was planted there and then some. Plants that had never been seen before to the human eye. It could only be described as beautiful. There was also a woman there who was sweet and motherly-like. Her hair was blonde and looked as if her hair had been spun by an orb, weaver's spider. She wore a long white silk dress, and her essence reminded me of a goddess. The most interesting thing about her were her eyes. It's like they changed color every second, never staying one specific hue. I think we had a conversation, but this all happened so long ago I can't tell you what was said. The dream ended with her kissing my forehead. After that was when I woke up. After coming out of the coma, I knew something was different about me. For one, there were these glistening white numbers that were plastered above everybody else's head. It was also like a new purpose had been given to my life. All these years later, I couldn't tell you what it is. Even that feeling of purpose has seemed to dim. Having no possible clue what the numbers could mean, I did the reasonable thing any kid would do. Ask the nearest adult. Hey, Dad, what does the number 47 mean? I wrote it on the notepad the hospital staff had given me to write with since I wasn't able to use my vocal cords correctly yet. My father scrunched his eyes in confusion. What are you going on about, Henry? I scribbled some more. The number above your head. The 47. What does it mean? Are you sure you're feeling all right? He asked, eyeing me up and down suspiciously, like I had just committed a very serious crime. I nodded my head. I felt fine. I just wanted to know what the damn numbers stood for. Instead of answering my question, Dad left the room to track down the nearest doctor. The rest of that afternoon was spent getting a whole bunch of brain scans done, all of which came back normal. I had no growths, tumors, or brain bleeds that would explain why I was seeing numbers above everyone's head. That night, I sat in my hospital bed feeling dejected. Nobody could explain to me why I was seeing things nobody else saw. My mother was beside me, rubbing my hand, trying to comfort me. The number 45 glistened above her head. Drowning in self-pity and tired from being poked and prodded all day, I fell asleep. That night, I dreamt about the lady in the garden again. She held me in a tight, warm embrace and then whispered something in my ear. When I woke up the next morning, I felt better, enlightened. Mom, how old are you? I scrolled on the closest napkin after she brought me breakfast. That's an interesting question, dear, she told me. It's a rude question to ask a lady, but I'm 45. It was then that I knew that I could see people's ages. After another month in the hospital, I was finally released and able to go home. What is the first thing you think I did after coming home from the hospital? I told all my friends of my new ability, of course. This, my friends, is when my ability started to ruin my life. Nobody believed me, even when I tried to prove it. No one even thought it was cool that I could supposedly see how old a person was. My friends dumped me, and I became known as the freak who lied about everything. The bullying was bad, too. Oh God, the bullying. Even my teachers got so annoyed at the insistence of my ability that my parents were called. I got a lecture. The only thing I learned from it was to keep my mouth shut and don't tell anyone that I can see their age. All it would lead to was pain and misery. We eventually moved out of that town, and I got to move schools. It was a fresh start for me to go to a school where nobody thought I was weird or a liar. Of course, I didn't dare tell anybody about my ability or my past either. I was never the same after all that. I stuck to staying in the shadows. Nobody would notice me if they didn't know I was there after all. To this day, I regret my decision to tell anybody about my curse. High school came and went, and I graduated. High school was enough for me, so I didn't move up to higher education. Instead, I did the only reasonable thing a person in my situation could do: become a bartender. The pay was adequate for the long hours I worked. I got to sleep in on most days, and my boss was chill. His name is Marty, and he owns Marty's, the bar I work at. The place was small and barely up to health code, but I considered it my second home. My first home being the apartment right above the bar that Marty leased to me. My ability made my job a little easier, especially when the state sent in a minor to make sure we were doing people. I was always at the top of my game. Their spy wouldn't make it 3 feet from the door before I turned them away. When their fake ID didn't check out either, they sulked right out of the bar. Every time a kid came in with their ironclad fake IED, they got turned around. When they protested that they were of age, I told them that the cops could come down here and verify their age for themselves. That usually got them to stop mouthing off and leave. Now, tonight was like any other night at Marty's. I'd been in the middle of a small rush around midnight, how it usually was that time of night, slinging drink after drink. I was also alone as usual. Seeing as I was a seasoned bartender, I didn't really need a bar back or another bartender, even though the extra help would have been nice. Marty couldn't really afford it, though. It was busy enough where I didn't see her slip in. I had turned around to blend a third frozen margarita for Gladys, one of Marty's regulars. I was stuck in a conversation with her about how good it was to still be youthful. Gladys was full of shit. She always went around telling everyone she was only 46, but her true age sat right above her head in big, bold numbers saying 59. When I turned back, I noticed the woman sitting there at the end of the bar. As it had become second nature to me, I glanced above her head slightly to see her age. The frozen margarita almost fell out of my hands. The woman had been typing away at her phone, so she didn't notice me fumbling. I quickly handed Gladys her margarita before haphazardly trying to recollect myself. "What can I get for you tonight?" I asked her as confidently as I could muster. I rubbed my eyes, pretending to be a little sleepy. In reality, I rubbed my eyes to make sure I was seeing her age correctly. Above the woman's head in stark white letters was the number 300. At first I thought I misread the number. After all, she looked like she should have been in her early 30s, not 300. But alas, the number 300 was firm where it stood. Her hair was long, wavy, and a dark shade of ebony, as if her hair was the night sky itself. She had glistening brown eyes that had this hunger behind them. She also wore a shade of red lipstick that popped out at you. For her pale complexion, the color looked really good on her. Ever since I'd gained my ability, the only ages I've seen were normal ones, only going up to 3 digits once when I met a World War I veteran. This woman had to be the oldest person I've ever seen. Against my better judgment, I chalked her numbers up to somehow being a fluke. There was no way someone could actually live to 300 years old, right? "I'll have a Bloody Mary," she said with a toothy smile. Something about her perfect white teeth sent shivers down my spine. It irked me. "Anything else I can get for you?" I asked, remembering it was rude to stare, though she seemed to revel in the uneasy look in my eyes. "Names are a powerful thing, you know," the woman stated as she rested her chin on the backs of her hands. I could tell she was toying with me. I chuckled as I grabbed a tall, skinny glass and a stalk of celery. "Well, my name has no power to it. I'm Henry. It's nice to meet you." I stuck my hand out to her. She smiled and let out a small laugh before taking my hand and shaking it. "Harley!" Harley. What a fitting name for the woman in front of me. She wore a leather jacket over a plain white t-shirt. If I had to describe her in one word, it would be biker girl. "I like you, Henry," Harley said, flipping some of her long hair behind her shoulder. The flirtatious action made a knot form in my stomach. "Thank you," I said, forcing myself to smile, handing her drink to her. I took a second to look her over again before starting to tend to the other customers in the bar. I made sure to keep an eye on Harley the whole time, my curiosity getting the better of me. About an hour later, one of the regulars, Jeb, started to hit on Harley. He was 6 beers deep and couldn't tell his ass from a water hose. "Come on in, sweets. Come back home with the Jeb. I'll treat you right, sugar. We'll have a fun time," he slurred drunkenly as he wrapped a hand holding a bottle of beer around her shoulder. I could see Harley's features contort into an expression of uncomfortableness. "All right, Jeb," I started, slinging the towel I was using to clean a glass over my shoulder. "I'm cutting you off. Clearly, you've had enough to drink tonight." Jeb waved me off and brought his free hand to Harley's boob, where he squeezed it gently. A look of shock and fury filled her face. "Jeb," I said testily, grabbing the beer out of his hand. "Leave him alone, man," the 18-year-old kid who came in with Jeb shouted from next to the drunkard. "The only reason I let him stay at the bar is because he only ordered a can of Coke." Normally, he never caused trouble when him and Jeb came in anyway. Jeb must have been this guy's into college parties since he was only 22. But with a name like Jeb, I'd expected him to be 63. Jeb was getting more handsy, and I could tell Harley was going to snap at any moment. "The both of you, get out of here. Now, before I call the cops on you for giving me a fake ID, and Jeb for letting you stay in here knowing you were a minor." Like a deer caught in headlights, the kid went, "How did you?" I cut him off. "I don't tolerate harassment of any kind at my bar. Get out, now." Jeb's friend grabbed him off of Harley before quickly running out of the bar and into the streets. Harley dusted herself off while staring at the direction the duo ran away in. She then looked back at me and shot me an icy glare. Thanks, but I could have handled that myself. I shrugged in response and went back to cleaning up around the bar. The rush had ended a while ago and only a few patrons were left. A couple, Gladys and Harley. When I turned back to Harley, I noticed she was gone. In her place was a $5 bill and her drink glass. Not one drop had been sipped from the Bloody Mary. I shrugged the ominous feeling that Harley left behind and went back to my closing duties. I kicked a few drunks out of the bar, called them taxis, and then closed Marty's down for the night. The sound of heels crunching against gravel took my attention off the back door to the bar. A tall shadow showed at the alleyway entrance. I tucked my keys in between my fingers and tightened the grip on the garbage bag in my other hand. Like I said earlier, a familiar voice echoed off the walls in the alley. "I can handle myself." Harley stepped into the edge of light coming from a street lamp behind her, wiping something off her face with her sleeve. Blood. Her mouth was covered in blood, and she had a crazed look in her eye. Her once white shirt, now a rusted brown color. She smiled at me again. This time, 2 huge fangs hung in her mouth. The word vampire flooded my mind as her age started to shine more intently above her head. The woman before me was literally 300 years old. A 300-year-old vampire. She was on me quick, giving me no time to prepare or defend myself. The garbage bag and keys in my hands fell to the ground as I was stuck in her strong grasp. Harley pulled my black polo down and licked the area where my neck and shoulders connected, sending weirdly pleasurable tingles down my spine. I braced myself for the pain that would come from the bite when she eventually stopped licking me. I heard her hiss as a hot stench of iron filled my nostrils. "Don't worry, Henry. I'll make it quick." Harley then clamped her jaw shut as she bit down. I screamed out in pain as I imagined all the blood being sucked from my veins, my body withering away into nothing but a husk and Harley standing over my corpse, full and satisfied with my exsanguination. I started crying as my mind flooded with regrets. How much better could my life have been if I never told anyone about my ability? Maybe my parents wouldn't think I was crazy and a disappointment. Maybe I could have gotten a girlfriend, settled down, gotten a nice house and had a kid. In my hysteria, I hadn't noticed there had been no pain at all. Harley had released me. When realization struck, I spun around in confusion. My neck was fine and not a single blood cell was taken from me. Harley stood behind me, chuckling to herself, as if she should have known better. In the palm of her hand was a sharp fang. It belonged to her, seeing as a nice gap was in place where her upper left canine once rested in her gums. "Oh, fuck!" she yelled out in an angry laugh, stomping her black leather Doc Martens on the ground. Harley looked me in the eye, a deep-seated hatred behind her eyes. "You're a goddamn chosen." Fish hooks. Hooks. A penny from 1971. Something bent and warped. Too light to be valuable. A bit of old jewelry, perhaps, smashed against the rocks. Why am I doing this? I must like standing in the rain. I must like the heady smell of seaweed and salt. The crisp sound of wet sand beneath my feet. The inevitable feel of it between my toes, despite the sturdy shoes and thick woolly socks that I wear. This beach is littered with cheap tat and nothing else. I've been coming here for years, drawn by the excitement of a silver coin found in 2008. Since then, I've found the odd musket ball, but nothing of any real value. Most of the time when I get down on one knee, I anticipate disappointment. And yet here I am, still scanning the sand and rocks looking for another one. In a million find with my detector, but there's nothing here. This place has been combed thoroughly. Not by competing hobbyists, but by myself, slowly and painfully over a process of years. This is hardly a place for sunbathers. The sloping cliffs rise overhead as I pick my way along what little sand lies between the rocks and the ocean. Seagulls coast lazily in the sky, but down here on the ground, the wind is fierce and so is the sea. White horses race furiously towards the land, breaking not far to my right, folding into themselves to paw lazily at old clumps of rotting seaweed and stubborn rocks. I am alone standing at the feet of giants. For a moment I take my headphones off and look around, my senses battered by the wind. Eyes stinging, I scan the way back. When I began, there was an old man going for a walk, but he's nowhere to be seen now. Not long, and the tide will erase the way back. This isn't a popular beach, not with families. Nudists sometimes come here during winter to go racing into the waters, screeching and giggling, titillated and thrilled. Those nude retirees visit this place for much the same reason I do. It's not good for bathers, swimmers, surfers, or much else. The rocks are dangerous. Riptides funneled by powerful geography have claimed more than a few lives. It does well to do your research before going for a dip, but if you're prepared, it can be safe and the tall cliffs make for an attractive privacy barrier. Only those who know the area can find the rocky path that leads down to the sand. Most don't even know it exists, one of the world's forgotten little corners. I wonder why I am still here when I've wasted the afternoon looking for nothing, so far from comfort and warmth. It is a long way back to the car. I picture the feel of a cup of tea held in both hands, the sound of wind buffeting my house, on wheels, and am ready to finally call it a day and go home when something catches my eye. It glitters on the sand not far from me, and I approach it, expecting a piece of litter, a foil wrapper perhaps. I pick it up and trace its shape with my fingers. My mind moves at a glacial pace. It is a gold coin. It is cold to the touch, handmade pre-Saxon. The ancient head stamped into its metal is strange, warped with time. It resembles a man with the mouth of an angler fish. It is beautiful. It is everything I've ever wanted. Solid gold and thicker than a smartphone. 6 months' rent in the palm of my hand. Didn't even have to use my metal detector. It was right there on top of the sand. It must have come from the water, placed here by those rapid waves. My mind conjures the image of a sunken shipwreck, a mile or two off the coast, its waterlogged coffers filled with coins just like these. Clusters of jewels gelded with silver and gold, an ancient treasure that has finally broken loose after centuries of tidal warfare. That might mean there's more. I look around, but there's only shale and sand. 100 meters away, where the rocks become hard to navigate, something else shimmers in the sun. But that could easily be a rock pool catching the sun. I should go back, I tell myself as I scan the beach once more. The sea is coming. Behind me, the sand has narrowed to just 10 meters. I know from experience it will disappear faster than seems possible. Then there will just be water and cliffs. If I get caught, the best-case scenario is that I'll be able to scamper up to safety somewhere and get rescued by a helicopter. My humiliation paraded for all to see on the local papers. Happens at least once a year, but the stakes are higher than you might think. Another coin would make a year's rent. Again, that image of a sunken chest full of treasures flashes into my mind. Absurd, I tell myself. A child's fantasy, but I'm holding the evidence of it in my hand. A gold coin. How often in my life has a fantasy come true? I dig my fingers into the gold as hard as I can. I want to make sure it's real. How often does a fantasy need to come true? Just once, I mutter, my words lost to the wind. It isn't easy. The rocks here are sharp and treacherous. As a child, when my mother first brought me to this beach, I imagined myself walking across a giant's fingerprints. Back then, I glided across stone ridges, pivoting the arches of my feet like a spinning top, moving effortlessly across the strange landscape. Some of the gaps are 3-4 feet deep. Falling would have hurt, but I didn't fall. I was young, nigh invincible. It isn't like that now. It might be my knees. It might be my knees. It might be the fear. It might be nerves, but I wobble each time I lift my foot, my body struggling to balance ridges as thin as a pencil. I fall twice, and the second time it hurts like hell. Ripped jeans, ripped skin, blood, a gash that takes 30 seconds for the pain to reach consciousness. I grit my teeth. Determination floods me. I look back and realize that the sand is no longer there. Turning back now means wet socks and shoes, ankle-high water. I'd be human. I look down at the cut in my leg, watch the blood flow thinly into salt water until it turns a pinkish yellow. There's another gold coin. All thoughts of turning back dissolve as I fumble for it in my fingers. I want more. I want the coffer. I want the coffer. I want to run my fingers through gold like it's liquid. I want to submerge my arms elbow deep into the treasure. I can't stop picturing. But the tide is coming. The tide is here. Furious waves falling just a few feet short of my position. This will have to do. 2 coins. A year's worth of rent. I accept this compromise and begin to turn back. A wave hits me. It is worse than any punch. No boxer has ever hit this hard. Here is a force that shapes continents, and it has me firmly in its grip. I can't tell you how long this next part lasts. There is salt, spray, foam. I am tossed about in a way that I have never been before, like a roller coaster without the tracks. A rock smashes my ribs, another my ankle. Something breaks. There is darkness. There is light. I am dying. I am sure of it. When I awake, it is to the feeling of my lungs fighting for air while I lie on my back. For a second, I am just an animal and loving it. Then, the rest comes flooding back. The beach. The coins. I lurch upwards and stare at my palm clutched so tightly I have to will the muscles to open. Sure enough, the gold coins are still there. I laugh, but the movement hurts, and even worse, it starts something. In just a few short seconds, I am forced to reckon with 3 terrible facts. First, my ribs are broken. Second, my ankle is broken. Third, I am going to be sick. The salt burns, but it is nothing compared to my ribs and ankle as I struggle to roll over. I cannot help but cry as I vomit. I've never known pain like this. I manage 4 pitiful heaves of seawater and bile before collapsing in a breathless fit. My chest feels full of gravel. After a few long breaths, I sit up, secure the coins in a pocket with zipper, and look around. I realize how strange the world has become. I am lying on a flat rock at the mouth of a cave. I must have been deposited here like one of those coins, and I count myself lucky. I want to look outside. I want to take register of how far I am along the coast and how low the sun has fallen. But I cannot stand, and movement is beyond difficult. The best I can manage is a crawl, and I soon realize I am going to need all my energy. A gentle lapping of water reaches my feet and soaks my legs and arse. I haven't even managed to catch my breath, to contemplate the jagged ruin of my ankle, and already the tide is catching up with me. It makes sense, I suppose. The sea put me here, so of course it isn't far behind. I hiss aloud. For the first time since finding the coins, my mind snaps back into what feels like a normal speed. I am in incredible danger, and it's still not too late for that luck to run out. I pat my pockets. My phone is broken and unresponsive. My only light is a waterproof torch I keep on my keychain. A Christmas gift from my mother. She likes that I have a hobby. She says it makes it easier to shop presents for me. I turn the torch on and almost cry at the serendipity of it. Until now, I have never used it. The cave ahead is roughly waist-high, and it goes deeper than my torch can reach. The ocean is rising behind me, furious at losing its catch. Thankfully, the cave slopes upward a few meters in, so I begin to crawl, seeking higher ground. I drag myself off the flat rock and further into the cave. I make slow progress across the collection of eroded gravel and random crap the water has deposited here over the years. Fishing tackle, old nets, driftwood, a cat's skull. I cannot help but stop at that last one. Hollow eyes glare back at me like a warning. I shake the feeling off and move onwards. I am losing this chase, I realize, as the water catches up to my belly. Shit. I drag myself elbow over elbow like they do on those army adverts. Be the best. I think over and over as my ankle catches on the stones and my ribs grind in my chest. I haven't cried like this since I was a child, but I don't stop. The water is at my chest now. The cat's skull is floating somewhere behind me, buoyed by the rising sea. I don't want to join it. At last, I make it to where the ground begins to rise. The darkness ahead makes for an ominous savior, but here is my only chance of survival, and I cling to it. I ignore the caveman inside me. He is terrified of this place and is banging every warning drum in my mind that he can reach, but I forge my way ahead regardless. Arm over arm, my progress is slow. Maybe a meter for every 10 minutes. I cannot say for sure. I'm no athlete. When the rising tunnel becomes too steep for my elbows to offer much traction, I dig my fingers into cracks in the stone and pull myself along that way. Meanwhile, the water climbs still. I feel its icy touch, reach my collarbones, and let out an audible cry. I don't want to die. It terrifies me, the thought of it. The pain most of all. How painless is drowning, I wonder. Less painful than this. I want to weigh up the pros and cons of letting go and sliding back into the water, but my brain won't let me. It is all or nothing. Instincts older than the continents propel me. Fighting to hold my chin up as the water reaches my bottom lip, I fail to notice the ground changing direction, a sudden downward tilt that leaves my hands flailing. I want to pause and gauge the way ahead, but it is far too late. I am carried over the top by a mix of gravity and the water's currents. For a moment, I am weightless, and then there is total darkness. For the second time that day, I pass out. When I awake, I am on my stomach and in so much pain that I am actually able to register a glimmer of anger at the world around me. This is starting to feel personal, and that spark of frustration is what gives me the strength to lift my head up and try to gauge where I am. Luckily, my torch stayed strapped to my wrist, and I use it now to see that I am in a head-height cavern. Nearby is a crack in the rock, and from there the water drains. Lucky for me, or else I would surely drown. Behind me lies the way I came. It is a nearly vertical wall of rock, 10 meters high and slick with algae and eroded smooth by millennia of waves. I have no more chance of climbing it than I do the Empire State Building. I watch as another wave crests the top and strikes me like a thrown bucket. Nearby, that crack has begun to fill, backwash lapping eagerly at my feet. If I stay here, I will likely drown in less than an hour, but this isn't a death trap. Not yet. Anyway, the cave carries on. Another tunnel, chest height big enough to crawl through. It bends gently out of sight, and something about the darkness beyond makes my stomach curdle. For all I know, it terminates after a meter. But I have no choice except to try. I persist, crawling onwards around the corner. It seems safe at first, but then the tunnel begins to narrow. I try not to let it worry me. I am on my stomach, and there is room to spare as the ceiling gradually lowers from 6 to 5 to 4 feet. When it starts to graze my shoulder blades, I have to suppress the need to hyperventilate. Then it's not just the ceiling that's getting closer. The walls on either side encroach on my arms, and the panic becomes very real. I keep hoping they'll widen any second, but they don't. They just keep pressing closer and closer. I want to turn back, but already I can feel water reaching my knees. I try to turn back and find I can't. This realization seems to drain the world of all color, but I try not to dwell on what it means. I keep going. Without realizing what I'm doing, I leave my arms out in front until the walls narrow so tightly I can no longer bend them at the elbow. I am forced to move entirely on the motion of 2 wrists and 1 functional ankle. If I thought progress before was slow, this is 1,000 times worse. Time crawls to a halt as I struggle against my own entombment, and I spend what could be 10 seconds or 10 hours staring at a single bit of rock, the fingers of my right hand working furiously while my left foot tries to push me forward. I move no more than a centimeter at a time. Without warning, the panic hits me like a hammer blow. I can't move. I try to thrash in anger, but it's more like a seizure. My wrists and ankles flick left and right, looking for leverage, but there's nothing. I should try to think clearly, but most of my mental energy has to go to fighting panic. My emotions reach breaking point, and I begin to sob out loud and curse. Soon, I become hyper-aware that I cannot breathe in fully because the tunnel is compressing my ribs. There's no budging the stone. It is so unyielding. Every breath is limited, and so they start to come faster and faster and faster in a desperate bid to chase away the ever-growing sense of suffocation. I just want one deep breath. One deep breath. But I can't. The more I struggle, the more desperate the need for oxygen becomes. I am trapped in a downward spiral that feels like it is killing me. This is the worst-case scenario. I realize. I was better off drowned. Nothing can possibly be worse than this. I want to pass out. I want to die. Neither happens. The world goes a bit woozy. I am overcome briefly by dizziness. But there's no changing this. Instead, I am forced to face my fear, and while I cannot beat it, I can at least observe it. I don't really have much of a choice. Neither the cave nor I are going anywhere, so I pay attention to the lightheadedness, the pain in my chest, the weight of the earth above and below me. My heart races so quickly it feels like it might just seize up and stop. I focus on its rhythm. I count each beat in the tattoo. Slowly, without meaning to, this heightened awareness causes some of the panic to ease up. I can describe it only as a sort of out-of-body experience, except I never leave my body. I am inside it, painfully aware of every constraint and bondage, of every ache and pain. At last, I notice something new. If I breathe out, the rock is no longer squeezing me to death. If I exhale and keep the air out, the feeling of constraint becomes almost tolerable. It is the only physical sensation of relief I have felt since this began. And just like that, I am back in the driver's seat. It is so obvious in hindsight. I want to laugh. I exhale and keep the air out of my lungs and wiggle my foot. My body moves. I try it again, and this time I inch forward. I do it maybe 50, 100 times. All in all, I travel a meter, I think. And then the rock gives way. I weep like a baby. I can breathe. A full breath, and the tunnel keeps widening. Before I know it, I have my arms back at my side, and I'm using my elbows to drag myself forward. Soon there is no tunnel scraping my shoulder blades at all. No rock to bang my head against. I emerge head first and drag myself out of the tunnel and drop a few feet onto a rocky floor below. I roll onto my back and let rip with laughter. It is howling and mad and like nothing I've known in my life. Weeping with utter joy, I look to my left and right, ready for the next step in this nightmare. There is a man smiling at me. Jesus fucking Christ, I squeal, scrambling upwards and away. Without meaning to, I kick him in the face and his head lolls backwards like he's trying to laugh. I see his mouth is a bloody ruin. His eyes and teeth are gone. He isn't smiling at all. He's dead. Something has torn his jaws open and removed his teeth. The result merely looks like a Joker-esque grin. Terrified, I shuffle over and briefly flick a hand out to touch him. A quick shove to the shoulder. He does not react. It takes another 3 or 4 pokes before I finally convince myself he's inert. Reality asserts itself with a kind of numb dread. This really is a dead body, I tell myself. His face is pale in the glare of my torch, but a quick hand to the forehead tells me he is still warm. And that windbreaker is awfully familiar. I rack my mind and summon an image of that old man on the beach. He'd been wearing a jacket much like this one, but it can't be him. I decide. It simply cannot be him. This place is a nightmare, I think, a real-life underworld. I look around and try to imagine how this body came to be here. There are strange things bundled against a far wall. I approach and go through them, but their effect is similar to the gold coin. My thoughts become frozen and sluggish. I inventory them like some idiot, unable and unwilling to see the bigger picture. 6 coats, 15 shoes, countless hats and gloves, all of them torn or ripped in some fashion. 3 backpacks, exercise books from a school, paper turned to mulch long ago, a pencil case stuffed with soft pencils and broken pens. I drop the last item to the floor and swivel my light across the room behind me. I don't like this. My mind races with possibilities. Suddenly, I am scanning this small chamber like my life depends on it, desperate to answer a question that supplants all others. Maybe I should have listened to that caveman, I think. I may not be alone down here. There is writing on the wall. I cannot recognize the language, but it frightens me. Paragraphs of it scrawled in neat blocks, one after the other. Occasionally, it is broken up with simple pictograms of ships and spear, wielding men. If it tells a story, I cannot make heads or tails of it. Something about the scene is getting to me nonetheless. The body, the pile of forgotten things, an ancient language. I stop myself sinking into another full-blown panic by remembering that these are all irrelevant details. I need to leave this place no matter what. There are several tunnels leading out of this cavern, all much larger than the last one. I pick one at random. Hopefully, it is more reliable than the last I crawled through. Fighting the pain, I rise onto my knees and hands. It hurts like hell, but it lets me leave swiftly and quietly. I scamper along, offering only one last sad glimpse at the body. The old man is looking at me. He is still grinning, and I am glad to take the light away and put distance between us. Whether or not this path leads out, I appreciate that it at least stays wide open. At points, it is even large enough for 2 or 3 people to walk abreast. I've never been thankful for this kind of room before. Just a day ago, this would have felt like a crowded elevator. Now, it's like an empty stadium. It lets me stop and catch my breath. Lets me race ahead and make progress. Either can happen on my terms. Minutes slide away in the dark where time has no meaning. For long periods, I turn the torch off and navigate by sound and touch, relying on my echoes to tell me when the tunnel takes a sudden change in direction. This is something that if you had asked me this morning, I would have told you I could never manage. But it is surprisingly easy. More than once I detect the change in what is an otherwise uniform soundscape and stop, lighting up my torch and seeing a sharp bend right or left. I am acquiring a competency that gives rise to a flickering hope. This confidence fades when I come to a fork in the tunnel. For a moment I am caught by indecision, but then something familiar catches my eyes. There is a gold coin, another, pristine just like the one on the beach. This time it does not exhilarate me. No images of sunken chests come to mind, only the leering grin of the pallid corpse I left behind and the grim words etched into stone. The world is heavy, weighing down from above, and I am so small and alone down here. The darkness so complete as to suffocate. I stare at the coin, at its positioning in a tunnel that takes a hard left turn out of sight. I don't like it. I don't like its placement. Taking it would place me right at the threshold of the unseen. I am certain of nothing in this underworld, possessing only the risk-averse instincts of a prey animal, but I decide that coin is a trap based only on those instincts. It is almost arrogant, unsubtle. I am wide-eyed with the smell of blood still fresh in my nose. A twitching hair, ears raised. I have a feeling that whatever set that trap is near enough to hear my every breath. I am separated from death only by the gossamer thin limits of my perception. It's right there, and it expects me to take the bait. I realize with some disappointment I already have. I'm 2 coins deep into this nightmare. The whole thing, a carefully laid trap from the start. My only hope is that I'm no Highland hare. I can think beyond action and reaction, but I have to be quick. I weigh up my options. If something is there, do I really want to let it know I'm aware of it? I suppose every ambush, sooner or later, has to release itself. Better to be in control, I decide. I find a rock. There are plenty of them. Slowly, quietly, I back away from the fork and find a ridge in the stone walls that I can hide behind. It is small and offers little shelter, but it's the best I have, and I hope it'll work anyway. I thumb the switch, and my light goes out. I throw the stone in my fist and squeeze myself back into my hiding space and hold my breath. Just in time, the stone smashes into the wall of the right-hand tunnel. This is the one without the coin. There is silence for what might be 5-10 seconds, and then there is only the gentlest of sounds. The touch of something soft against the stone. What a far cry from the synthetic world of engines and buzzing motors I am used to. I've spent my life training myself to ignore those kinds of quiet, barely perceptible scuffles. A cat's footfalls, a bird's wings, a scurrying rat. But down here, the sound is like thunder. It makes my blood run cold and the hair on my scalp stand on edge. A part of me had thrown the stone convinced I would only prove myself wrong. But now, the terror is so real that I can almost reach out and touch it. It is as tangible as the wall I am trying desperately to dissolve into, as real as my own flesh and blood. I am being hunted. Whatever was in hiding has seemingly taken the bait. The sound of its movements disappears down the right-hand tunnel. Thank God for that caveman. He remembers the plan. Acting on instinct and painfully aware of the ticking clock, I force myself to peek around the rocky outcrop and turn on my torch. There lies the fork again, and if I had any doubt about the trap before it is thoroughly beaten down, when I see the gold coin has disappeared. I waste no more time and scrabble on all fours down that turning, pausing only briefly to consider if my hunter has employed a double bluff. Oh well, I think, it's too late now. Around the corner I go and find nothing but darkness. I could try and perform some mental gymnastics, convince myself there was never anything there in the first place, but on one of the walls I spot a streak of something reddish-brown. There is just enough time in passing to be sure that it is blood, and then I am gone, desperately crawling further into darkness. Occasionally, I stop and check over my shoulder for signs of something giving chase. If it took the bait and followed the wrong tunnel, who's to say it didn't quickly realize and is now barreling down on me? Or that the tunnels don't intersect down the line? If something lives here, it must be incredibly familiar with the layout of these sprawling caverns. I am merely a tourist in the shadows, hopelessly lost and ill-equipped for this kind of survivalist nightmare. But each time I look, there is only empty space, a frighteningly sterile landscape, brutal and haunting, looming over me on my hands and knees. Rock walls curved and jagged, ribbed and rippling, a concrete column where light can only reach so far. Each time I look, I have to force myself to break eye contact with the darkness and resume my journey. I do this 16 times. I do not know how long elapses between each glance. I only count the number until, at last, the everlasting tunnel takes a break, and I am deposited in yet another cavernous room. This time, I am almost blinded by the light it emanates. For a moment, I turn my head upwards, expecting to see a bulb. Instead, there is a hole in the roof, and only the faintest glimmer of sunlight makes its way down. But after hours in pitch-black darkness, it felt like staring right at the sun. It is too far to see the way out, or to get any real hint of the sky beyond. I can't say if it's night or day up there, but I know the sky must be close. So close. The hole itself isn't far above me, and using my light I can spot a kind of ancient rusted ladder embedded in the rock. It won't be easy climbing it so injured, but given my limited choices, I'll just have to manage. For the first time in hours, I stand on my 2 feet. Reaching upwards hurts everything from my chest to my toes. Broken ribs grind. A swollen ankle pulses pain through deadened nerves that seconds ago reported nothing but hissing static. I swear it is so bad my heart stops, or at the very least it misses a beat. This must be the kind of stress that can kill healthy men, and I'm not even healthy. My elbow doesn't even get past my shoulder when I am forced to gasp for breath, and the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. I fall back onto my arse, and even that hurts more than I could imagine. Suddenly, I find myself questioning if I really have it in me to climb that pitted, rusty ladder. Something screams. It isn't far. This room, like the other before, has many ways in and out. It has writing on the walls, too. Pictograms of something strange with the head of angler being worshipped by men, the size of ants. My torch flashes across them all and makes nightmares of the shadows, but nothing yet leaps out at me. I realize this is it, the only chance I'm getting. How many chances do I need? I ask myself. Only one, I mutter. I force myself upright and, before my nerves have time to register the landslide of pain ready to collapse me, I hop on one foot. It is all I need to reach the ladder with one swinging arm. Then the other, so that I am there, clinging on for dear life, feet barely an inch off the floor with tears streaming down my face. This already feels like too much, but before I have time to give up and fold in on myself, there comes another scream. This one is so close I cannot help but imagine that whatever lies in the dark is excited to finally catch up with me. That last thought tempts fate, it seems, still swinging. Eyes darting to and fro from one of several tunnel holes, I catch a glimpse of something. It is racing towards me. It is human, vaguely, in the way that the monsters in our nightmares often are. I let out my own scream, or something like it. It's a staccato sort of yelp because, whether I realize it or not, my muscles have kicked into gear and I'm somehow doing a pull-up. Legs kicking furiously, I drag my way up until the first rung is at chest height, and I am able to grab another overhead. The pain in my chest retreats to a dull throb. I try foolishly to use my bad ankle to climb and realize there aren't enough endorphins in the world to let me put weight on a broken bone. I let out another cry and switch tactics. I have to use my arms to lift myself and rely on my one good foot as a stabilizer. This would be difficult but manageable if I had all the time in the world, but with the memory of that thing bearing down on me, it is akin to torture. I am flooded with a sense of futility, of pain and needless suffering. But if I've learned anything in the last few hours, it is that the human body runs on its own firmware, and it isn't slave to your brain. My arms move of their own accord. My body rises one rung at a time, too fast for common sense. Injuries abound. Grazed skin, a bumped head. Each step up has me clumsily bashing or banging some sensitive part of me into the barely visible rocks. Instinct may be in the driver's seat, but it's happy to leave me with the consequences of its recklessness. I feel every ache and pain, every stinging wound embedded with grit, every ligament stretched to breaking point. Oddly, I don't mind this arrangement. I want to live. I am glad there is a caveman inside me to take care of moments like this, especially when I glance down between my legs and see pitch-black eyes glaring up at me with thoughtless glee. I cannot get over how human that face is. I expected something insectile, maybe even arachnid. Whatever is below me, whether it's some hybrid or mutant, it is vile and fast approaching. The vibrating in the ladder tells me it is climbing too. I try to climb faster, but I really am operating on all cylinders right now. There's nothing left to spare. I don't want to, but I look down again, and there it is, even closer. It is smiling with a rubbery mouth full of glassy teeth. I hate it. I lash out with my bad foot without meaning to and hurt only myself. The pain is so severe I am forced to stop climbing and sob, and it is in that moment I feel claws sink into the hot, swollen flesh of my calf. I let out a hell of a noise. It empties my lungs and burns a mark deep into my being. I will remember the way this scream feels until the day I die. It is the moment in time where I give in to despair, where I lose all hope as my nervous system gives into a pain-induced seizure that sees my fingers go numb and my limbs go limp. The last thing I remember as I fall is the sight of an iron grate overhead, only 10-20 meters away. A man I think is standing there and shining a torch straight down. He says something I cannot hear. I tell myself this is a hallucination, nothing more. I enter free fall. My head hits a rocky outcrop. Beneath me, something crunches. Darkness. Darkness. I come to in a hospital bed with a feeling in my chest that makes me think of war. I lash left to right, grab a hold of a table, and jerk it across the floor, ready to wield it like a club. The nurse in the corner is afraid. She doesn't realize it, but I'm fighting for my life, or at least I think I am. Slowly, I blink the halogen glare away and take in my surroundings. The battleground fades. I realize where I am. I try to hold back tears. It doesn't work. Within seconds, I am bawling. Arms embrace me. I don't know who they are, and I don't care. I embrace them back. I seize them and cling onto their unfamiliar body with such severity, they mutter words to someone nearby along the effect of, "Ah, Jesus, he's hurting me." More rushed movement. A needle, a needle. I'm asleep again. Hours, maybe days later, I awaken to find my mother and a policeman nearby. This time, my senses return in time to stop panic. I am finally given the story of my rescue. They were looking for me the entire time, and by chance they heard me near the old storm drain. They came rappelling down no more than a few minutes after I hit the ground and found me lying there, bleeding and broken. Strangely, they say, I had no real injuries from the fall itself, a bumped head and a broken wrist from the way down, but from that height I should have broken my neck. Something cushioned my fall, I think, and laugh uproariously. My mother looks worried. She must think I've gone insane. Who can blame her? I was down there for over 24 hours, although it didn't seem like it to me. I explain this to them, the elasticity of time in the dark, and they nod like they understand. But of course they don't. Somehow, it takes me another hour to realize I'm missing a leg. This perplexes them as much as me. Indiscrepancies in the nature of the wound. An expert stands to the side and explains as much to me, but the words are a distant drone. I am taken aback by the sight of the stump, all neatly bandaged. Apparently, it took a lot of surgery to neaten it up. Despite everything, I am angry. I thought I was dead. This should be a small price to pay, and yet the knowledge that a part of me went to feeding that monster makes my stomach churn. I want to be sick. A piece of me is down there somewhere, dissolving in stomach acid, waiting to be shat out in some forehead corner of the monster's lair. When I start to cry and shout in impotent rage, they have to sedate me once more. They assume it is simple shock, but there is more to it than that. I am consumed by a deep hatred that is hard to explain. Months later, and I find myself writing this account to try and purge that hateful feeling. All this time, I cannot escape the sense of unfinished business. Every time I mess up with my prosthetic, slip, stumble, momentarily forget it, it is there. I feel the anger burning inside me. Every night I spend hours in agony from phantom pains, trying to soothe a wounded brain using a mirror of all things. Sometimes I think I would have rather died if it meant killing that thing. All my weight, such a steep drop. I picture myself crushing it and leaving it a gory, broken mess. I have never felt this kind of enmity. Evidently, I am not alone. One morning, I knock on the caravan door. It takes me far too long to get ready. I am not yet practiced with the limb, putting it on, taking it off. Taking it off takes me nearly 20 minutes to get myself together. My mood has darkened since my rescue, and I practically kick my door open with a roar, ready to curse out anyone who disturbs me. I find no one there. Only silence and another gold coin. I heard he was a mute, and the clapping is how he communicates. I heard he's a ghost, and the clapping is how he gets your attention. I heard you were both big old babies who will believe in anything. Daryl and Gary looked up incredulously at me as I grinned back at them from across the lunch table. Oh yeah. Well, he's been linked to the disappearance of like 4 kids now, so it sounds like a pretty good reason to be afraid of him, Daryl said, sounding mad. I just shrugged at him, popping a French fry into my mouth and savoring the salt. There's no proof that this clapping man is responsible for a candy bar going missing at Dell's, let alone Mickey Frazier getting snatched. The clapping man story was something that had been circulating for a while. 3 young kids had gone missing first, all of them heading home from somewhere or another, and some of the witnesses had reported hearing a clapping sound before they had gone missing. One of them had even reported seeing a man-sized shape in the woods before hearing the clap. They didn't have any details about the guy, but they said it looked like a person's shadow with long arms. Mickey had been the most recent disappearance and the one that made the cops around Tiger the most nervous. The first three had been younger kids, elementary school kids who hadn't looked like much. But Mickey had been a 17-year-old farm kid who was built like a linebacker. The story was that he was trying to find one of his dad's missing sheep around dusk and had just never come back. The stories were that he was near Kindle-covered bridge and that the sheep had been found dead underneath it the next day. There were the usual rumors that Mickey had run off or left to be with a girl, left to be with a boy for all they knew. But those of us who had known Mickey kind of doubted it. Mickey was slow, not like special ed slow, but he was slower than average. He loved his family, he loved working on his parents' farm, and the thought that he would just run off when he couldn't come back with a sheep was laughable. Mickey liked football too, but if his dad had asked, he'd have given it up in a heartbeat. The cops knew this too, and that's why they were so sure that Mickey had been taken by someone, and that the someone had to be big. The bell rang then, but we kept our seats as the good little sheep dispersed around us. We'd leave when the monitor finally told us we had to, and not a minute before. Gary still looked a little nervous as the cafeteria cleared out, but Daryl was pretty used to this. Daryl and me had been hellions since we were young, but it was a life that Gary was slowly getting used to. I'm not a bad kid, not really. I love my mama, I respect my daddy, I keep my truck well maintained, and I'm good to my girl when I have one. That being said, I have no time for weakness or rules. The only rule I know is that the strong rule, and it's a rule I learned from my daddy. If I'm strong, and I am, I should be able to do what I want. If other kids don't understand that, well, that's their problem, just like when I push them down and show them who's boss. Daryl, Gary, and me never really considered ourselves a gang or anything, but we pal around because we all believe that when you're strong, you're right. Mrs. Gladys looked our way, and I grinned at her as I waved. Mrs. Gladys is cute, but she ain't strong. She teaches home ec and she drives a Spark. Nothing about that says strong. She's come over before and tried to talk nice to us and get us back on the straight and narrow, but it never does any good. Eventually, she stopped trying, and when she turned and called for Mr. Gersh, the shop teacher, we took our feet off the table and started heading to class. Gersh was strong, an 8-year combat vet with the scars to prove it, and he was not to be messed with. We were halfway to class when the bell rang for the start of 5th period, and I looked at the boys and told them I thought we should maybe take the rest of the day off. I gotta get to math, Gary said. If I don't keep at least AC, they'll kick me off the football team. Same, Daryl said with a sigh. If I don't pass that history test today, my mom says I can't run the roads this weekend. Come on, man, just come to class with us. The beers will still be there after school. I blew a big old raspberry at them and told them that if they wanted to be pansies, then I'd go drink it all up before they got there. They begged me not to go, but I was done for the day. School had never really held any appeal for me, and I had already figured I'd drop out at the end of the year and go into haulin' lumber like my uncle or into farmin' like my dad. I was too dumb for the army and too lazy for college, but at least I had figured it out a year before everyone else. Have fun in math class then, I said, waving as I walked to the parking lot to get my truck. The little Ford Ranger Daddy had given me wasn't much, but it was fine for now. I really wanted one of those big F-350s like my uncle had, but I'd either have to save up a bunch of money or steal one to have something that nice. The Ranger was fine, and I slunk out of the lot in low gear before turning and flying up the road for home. The dirt roads of Tiger were like a second home to me, and as I put the schoolhouse behind me, I thought again about just leaving on one of them for parts unknown. What was there really here for me? A dead-end job and a naggy wife, squalling kids and a mortgage I couldn't pay, a bottle of beer after work with the boys, and a loveless marriage that would hang like a shackle around my neck. Maybe a trip to Straview if I wasn't careful, or a telephone pole in the night if I'd had one too many beers. I didn't like to think too much about the future then, preferring to live in the moment, and this particular moment was about to contain a 12-pack of beer. I pulled in behind the barn so Daddy wouldn't see me if he came home early. Daddy was at the farmer's market till around 4 selling his wares, and I figured he wouldn't be the wiser of me cutting school. I walked off into the field of peanuts, this year's crop, and on into the woods beyond. I had been exploring the woods since before I was potty trained, and the spot I knew of was about a mile back in an old tangle of trees. Darrell and me had found it when we were still small enough to squeeze between the roots of the snaky trees and make a clubhouse down there, and it now served as a spot for us to drink and smoke and bring girls to, for some privacy. The forest was familiar, an old friend that had protected me sometimes when Daddy had a little too much to drink, and before I knew it, I could see the old grove of trees in the distance. Most of the forest was thick old oaks and some scraggy little pulp trees, but the grove was different. It was old, felt ancient somehow, and being there made me feel peaceful, like nothing could hurt me while I was there. I got to the snaky trees and took a seat on the comfy old roots that stuck above ground, reaching into the gnarled old root system and pulling out the 12-pack of Budweiser. I cracked the first can and drank it quickly, smacking my lips as the crisp taste filled my stomach. This was the good life right here, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. I'd have to trade this kind of carefree time for adulthood soon enough, and the thought of saying goodbye to the snaky tree grove was a little sad. I opened a second one, drinking it slower this time, and as the wind rustled the leaves around me, I felt a yawn creeping up my throat. Daddy and me had been splitting wood before school today and the early morning, and the lukewarm beer was starting to make me groggy. As the second one disappeared and the third one popped open, I got comfy and watched the dragonflies and little forest animals frolic in the boughs of the tree. I felt at ease like I was floating, and when the beer can slipped out of my hand and fell into the nest of roots, I was snoring before it dumped its delicious contents on the ground. When I woke up, it was dark, and the sounds of birds and squirrels had been replaced with insects and the scamper of bats. This didn't immediately put me off. I had been in the woods at night before. Darrell and me had camped out tons of times, and I had even slept rough a time or two if Mom and Daddy were fighting. I pulled myself out of the tangle of roots and wobbled a little before getting my bearings. I wasn't drunk, not by a long shot or hungover. I had taken a long nap in the woods, and now it was time to go home and face the music. The school would have called by now and told them I had left early. Daddy would have looked for me during evening chores and not found me. And these things would have culminated in him having a drink as he waited for me, so I was likely in for a bad time. I walked out of the grove, watching my step as I went, and that was when I first heard it. A loud pop sound that made me freeze in place and listen like a spooked deer. I stopped for a count of 5, waiting for it to come again so I could identify it, but all I heard was the quiet sounds of the evening woods. I started walking again, but after 5 more steps, I heard the loud pop again. I had thought it might be a tree branch cracking at first, but now it sounded more like something familiar. It wasn't a natural sound, not like a branch breaking or rocks bumping as they fell. This was a sound I hadn't really heard out here before, a sound I was familiar with, but seemed alien out here. It sounded like someone bringing their hands together for a single, hard clap. I kept walking towards the house thinking I was hearing things, but the longer I went, the more I heard the clapping sound. It was infrequent, always that one loud pop, and when I looked there was nothing I could find that would have made it. The longer I walked, the more freaked out I got at the popping. I found myself looking for man shapes in the woods, thinking about what the kids had told the cops. It was big, like someone's shadow standing in the woods. Its arms were longer than usual, and they had heard a loud clapping sound before their friends had disappeared. Pop, pop. I stopped again. It had been closer this time. It sounded like it was about 20 feet away, and the clap had silenced many of the forest creatures that had been buzzing placidly. I wanted to run, but I made myself walk so I didn't trip in a hole or knock myself unconscious with a low-hanging branch. There was also the fact that these were my woods. Nothing bad could happen to me in my woods. No one could hurt me here. No one would dare to. Pop, pop. Now it was closer, 10 feet or better. It was following me, and I was still a half a mile from home. I wondered how far it would let me get before it snatched me. Would they find any evidence that I had been alive? Would they ever find anything? Pop, pop. I quickened my pace. Holes be damned. I needed to go. I needed to get out of here. I needed to be behind my door with the lock thrown and the bolt pushed in. I'd hug my daddy and tell him I was sorry and take whatever punishment came, but I needed to know that the monster or freak or whatever was outside and couldn't get me. I ducked a branch that I saw as a vague outline and kept moving. The popping had stopped for now, but I knew I wasn't safe. I had to get home. I had to get home. I had to get... Pop, pop. I turned my head in the direction of the sound, and there he was. He was man-shaped. That was for sure. He looked like a bulky man, his arms and legs just thick outlines in the murk. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them on me. He didn't make a sound, but the longer I stayed still, the more I began to hear a low murmur like a TV show trying to break through the static. I thought he might be frozen by my stare, but as I watched, he raised his hands slowly and brought them together with a single hard clap. Pop, pop. I took off like a shot. I ran and ran and ran as the popping followed me. I expected that every step would be my last. A claw would come out or a set of teeth would clamp down on me, and I would be dragged away to whatever served it as a den for digestion or God knew what else. The popping started coming from directly behind me, and I could almost feel the air off those massive hands. I could see lights coming into view up ahead and thought I might have gotten turned around and found the highway. I didn't care. I just wanted someone to help me escape this creature, and I wasn't choosy about who. I broke through the tree line to discover that I had come out on the edge of my parents' farm, and the lights were flashlights as people looked for me. They were calling my name as they got closer to the woods, and I tore off towards the fields in an attempt to stop them from entering. One of them could have just as easily been this thing's next meal, and I wasn't about to draw them to it. I found Daddy first, his beam turning to fix me, and he wrapped me in a hug as he recognized me. Goddamn boy, I was so scared you'd been took. He hugged me close the first time I'd ever seen my daddy show that kind of emotion, and when he called out to them that he had found me, I saw them all start heading to his location. The police came and talked to me, and I don't know if they took me seriously or not. They did tell people to stay out of the woods for a while, and to listen for clapping if they were alone. Mickey was the last kid to go missing in Tiger that year, and when the clapping has come back after that, they seem better prepared for it. That experience changed me, and I'm glad to say it was for the better. I started taking my schooling a little more seriously, stopped being so impetuous, started helping people instead of taking, and changed my way of thinking a lot. I still believe that strong people are important, but now I also believe that they have a responsibility to help those who aren't strong. I started volunteering to go out on woodland rescues, searching for people who'd gotten lost or looking for remains, and I got approached by the Park Service to see if I wanted to work with them. Now I help educate people so they don't get lost, and I help find those who go missing. In a way, I guess I owe the clapping man a debt. He saved me that night from becoming a monster too, though I doubt it was his intention. The sleeping town of Salazar, the town of Salazar, Arizona existed in its own world, and its citizens liked it that way. The town was accessible only by way of a little dirt path, and if anyone had ever stumbled upon it by accident, they probably would have turned back, unaware that anything lurked behind the row of elm trees. And had anyone somehow come across the town, they probably would have felt uneasy, as if they were disrupting some sort of enchanted burial ground. They would have felt unwelcome. This isn't to say that the people of Salazar, Arizona, weren't friendly. It's just that everyone in the small town knew each other, and their ancestors knew everyone else's ancestors too. And in a town like that, where you know everything, when someone or something comes along that people know nothing about, it can be unsettling. But the people of Salazar were as nice as you'd find any other place. They were just shy to the idea of any change visiting their humble town, the town. It was readily accepted, started at the giant church building, which doubled as a town hall, and which was the very first building built in Salazar. And fittingly, the town's boundaries ended at the cemetery in the fields beyond the schoolhouse. Every person who'd ever lived in Salazar was buried in the cemetery, as there was no other area in which to bury them. And while cremation sometimes occurred, it was uncommon. Even after death, the citizens of Salazar wanted to be a part of their town. Why, they wondered, would anyone want to end up in an urn? The burials were always conducted by the Thade family, who ran the Salazar funeral home. The current chief undertaker, Evan Thade, had learned all the secrets of embalming that had been passed down from father to son for generations. Evan Thade looked like an undertaker. He had a brow that was permanently furrowed, and his spine was perpetually in the shape of a question mark, the result of years of hunching. His hair was brown, but anyone would have sworn it was black. Not because the hair was dark, but simply because it felt like it should be black. His eyes, likewise, were overshadowed by the blackness of his pupils, although if one were to look closely, they would have noticed that his eyes were actually a piercing, vibrant green. It was among Evan's duties as town undertaker to conduct the autopsies on the dead, since the town did not possess a licensed mortician, but Evan had never been trained in that practice. Embarrassed, Evan had never told anyone, and so the cause of death was always listed as natural causes. But whatever skill he may have lacked in performing autopsies, Evan made up for in terms of embalming. Evan Thade was a true master of preservation. The Thades were artists, and their canvas was the dead. Between the church and the cemetery were a variety of small homes, and enough shops to keep people occupied. Mildred Snipes, now 82 years old, had a clothing business which she ran out of her little cottage, the same house she'd grown up in as a little girl. Mildred, despite several strokes and a healthy dose of arthritis, had managed to maintain her good looks. She aged as one with wisdom might, not as one who had given up. A gifted seamstress, Mildred had spent since the age of 16 sewing clothes for the various townspeople, be it socks, hats, shirts, dresses. Whatever someone needed, they went to Mildred, and she'd make it for them. Her favorite garment to make was suits. Something about the fitting of suits exhilarated Mildred. She felt alive when making them. The smooth lines of the pinstripe as they run down the jacket or the pant leg, the crisp formation of the collar. Her father had been a button maker, and so each suit had a different custom set of buttons. Some were metal, some were wood, some bone. As she had studied violin as a young girl, she was the only member of the town who could read music, and therefore had been chosen as the town organist each Sunday. When not playing, she'd stare out at all the men sitting in the pews, admiring her handiwork on each of their Sunday suits. The church was the closest thing to a town hall. Despite Salazar's intimate setting, those Sunday church sessions were the only times the whole town would gather together. Although most members of the town were religious, even those who did not consider themselves so would go weekly in an attempt to fulfill their social obligations to the town. For 2 years now, Father Todd Luger had been the town's only priest. And while serving an entire town of parishioners alone seems a daunting task, Father Luger hadn't given a sermon for the past 10 months. He accomplished this through a program where he'd invite the members of the town to be what he called guest priests. It was an attempt to make church a more interactive and enriching experience, he said. Some of the older generation, such as old Mildred at the organ, though felt that Father Luger was simply shirking off his priestly duties and longed for the days of Luger's predecessor, who had staunchly followed all of the parochial rules to the very letter. But the guest priest's sermons did at least serve to enhance that social feeling that church seemed to provide the people of Salazar. These days, you can be ordained in an instant on these computers. Why can't ordinary folks be allowed to give sermons as well? Thought Father Luger one Sunday morning as he slept through Agamemnon's impassioned speech concerning the Gospel of John. The only person in Salazar who was never in attendance at Sunday services was Martin Gleinzer. From the time Martin had shown up for the first day of kindergarten wearing aviator goggles, he had been pegged as the weird kid. Perhaps because of that label, Martin's readily apparent genius was ignored. By the age of 7, he'd constructed blueprints to create a flying bicycle. At 10, he'd developed a unique and, to his knowledge, undiscovered fungus culture. And by the time he was 12, he'd created an effective and non-toxic deer repellent for folks to spray on their gardens. But even if someone had recognized the brilliance that Martin Gleinzer possessed, it would have been greeted with the same response. Kid, you're from Salazar, Arizona. And no one from Salazar, Arizona. And no one from Salazar, Arizona ever goes anything. As such, the days where Martin should have been at MIT were spent huddled in a small broom closet, which he referred to as his lab. His hair had gone gray early in his 20s, a trait he inherited from his father, and he felt so cheated by this fact that he'd allowed his hair to go into complete disrepair. Never combed, it had gone past the point of being unruly and was now permanently matted to the spot. The aviator goggles he wore in his youth had now been replaced by thick glasses. They were much thicker than he actually needed, but he liked the feel of the extra weight the lenses provided, and so he'd worn the overlarge glasses for some time, until he got used to it. He had denounced God completely, and so found church unnecessary. So, despite the distinct impression he inevitably left on those he met, there was no one in the town who he ever considered a friend. The one person Martin had gotten to know well of late was Evan Thade, the reclusive undertaker. Martin had recently seemed to have developed a profound curiosity for Evan's line of work, and the ordinarily shy undertaker had been more than happy to talk about the subject he was so familiar with, and which no one else seemed eager to talk about. And while they could never prove anything, some of the older school children had even mockingly commented on the relationship between the two bachelors upon seeing them walking in the cemetery during school hours. When they shared this with their parents, the response was generally quietly encouraging. Good for them. Everyone deserves to have someone in their lives, people would say. It was indicative of the overall mentality of Salazar. The town liked to think of itself as open-minded and filled with open-minded and good people. Aside from menial errands and his daily walks and conversations with Evan, the only other times Martin emerged were when he came to present one of his inventions to the town council. The council was made up of the most prominent citizens of Salazar, Arizona, and were in charge of allocating the small budget the town had. Despite having meetings in the church every Tuesday from 3:04:15, no one ever attended. The only time the council had anything to actually do at the meetings was when Martin had an invention, hoping to get funding to mass produce it. And while Martin's inventions ranged from good to not so good, the town's response was always the same. Kid, you're from Salazar, Arizona. And no one from Salazar, Arizona ever goes anywhere or does anything. Whether through obliviousness or blind optimism, Martin was feeling assured on this day as he approached the altar to begin the presentation on his latest invention. It was a good one, he was sure of it. With any invention, Martin brought it to the council with the confidence of a child, whose watercolor is hung on the refrigerator, sure that one day they'll be a great painter and that the work will sell for hundreds of dollars. This time, however, was different. The product simply called out, ringing like a siren in Martin's ears, and there was no way it could be ignored. Surely, the town council would hear the importance of this one. Surely they too would hear that ringing. "Hello, everyone. I'm glad you could all make it." Martin paused to carefully wipe the sweat from his knuckles. His palms, amazingly, were dry, but his knuckles were the ones glistening under the bright lights. "It should only take a minute." "Yes. Well, weekly meeting. Meetings are open for all to come. Share ideas," said Saul Moon, mayor of Salazar. Mayor Moon had always been a fair man. He felt strongly that the town should be able to weigh in on all of the town's decisions, even if they weren't part of the esteemed council. It was level thinking like this, which made him so popular amongst his constituents, and which had allowed him to run unopposed for the past 30-odd years. "No one comes anyway," laughed Egan Ammon, hitting Moon in the side. Ammon, a retired traveling string salesman, was the most recent member of the council. When not in the surrounding towns, pitching various strands of twine to housewives, he had claimed his own bench outside the barber shop, where he would wax poetic about the world. His job meant that he'd seen the whole state, and so was among the more cultured members of the town. Each day, Egan would sit on his bench and talk. Even if no one was there to listen, his voice kept himself company, reciting and inventing proverbs and mantras by which he'd live out his coming week. And if anyone felt that he was an unbearable bore, those opinions were never shared. "Well, Martin's here, right?" "That's someone," replied the mayor. "Yes, and when Martin's here, it's the only time we have anything to talk about." "So, we should give him a chance, shouldn't we, again?" said Mildred Snipes, nodding to Martin with grandmotherly eyes. "What do you have for us today, Martin?" "Well, I think this is a big one. I think that this could, well, change the way that we live." "Hrumph," snorted R.C. Goose, a local businessman and the richest man in all of Salazar. "What was that?" asked the startled inventor. "I said hrumph." "Hrumph? Yes, hrumph. I mean, really, Martin, this whole changing the way we live thing. You say this each time. I don't know what you mean. It's a charade," growled Goose. "Every new invention you claim it'll be the biggest thing since non-iron shirts. It never is. What was that last one? A solar-powered lamp? Well, yes. Aye. That was energy efficient. But if you need sunlight to power it, then why would you need the lamp?" asked Goose. The portly man checked the time. He had a pocket watch, of course, and once again let out a resounding hrumph. "I know you're a busy man, R.I.C. "Moo, but I can't see the harm in letting him speak," said Father Luger. Luger and Goose had never really seen eye to eye. Luger was constantly looking for more money to be allotted for the church. Goose felt that since he owned the only lucrative business in the town and brought in most of the town's revenue, it should be his business which received a bigger share. And yet, both found common ground in that neither felt that Martin Glinzer or any of his inventions should get anything. "Thank you, Father." Martin wiped his knuckles on his pant leg. Well, I was thinking that for every disease, there is a cure. For every ailment. You have a headache. We can cure that. You have the flu. We can cure that. I mean, you have a broken bone. We can even fix that. Anything that our bodies do to us, we can. Well, we can fix it. So, is this some sort of medicine? Asked Mildred. R.E.C., you gone. Not exactly. See, we can't actually fix everything. There's one thing we can't ever fix. We can't ever reverse. Once it happens, there's no way of treating it. A small bead of perspiration fell from his right knuckle, hit the stone floor, and melted under the hot orange light coming in from the stained glass window. The one thing we cannot ever treat, we cannot ever fix. We cannot ever fix death. One thing that our body does to us is, well, the council's eyes were blank. But now, well, I've fixed death. I've cured death. This potion, it can bring the dead back to life. Everyone instinctively stared at Cameron Ward, the final member of the town council, who sat at the end of the pew. Ward had been a soldier in the Vietnam War, where he lost 3 of his toes at the age of 17. Once back in Saluzar, he'd cared for his mother, Cecilia Ward. Mrs. Ward had raised Cameron alone, as her husband Oliver had died when Cameron was 2. Upon Cameron being drafted, Cecilia had descended into insanity, fearing she'd lose her son as she'd lost her husband. The past 40 years, Cameron had kept her inside as much as he could in an attempt to avoid embarrassment. Every Sunday, he and his mother would carefully go into the church, sit in the back row, and leave. Cameron was the perfectly dedicated son. And Martin's news was especially welcoming to Cameron. Cecilia Ward had died only a month ago, making her Saluzar's most recent casualty and still fresh on everyone's mind. Cameron felt the gazes of his council members and chose to be silent. After a while, Mayor Moon felt the need to respond. "You can fix death. Revive the dead, yes." Martin stared at them. I think, and I don't believe I'm mistaken, but I think it will change the way we live." The silence echoed through the church, bouncing off the organ pipes, the stained glass windows, the high ceilings. Finally, it was Egan Ammon who spoke. Any recently dead person, corrected Martin. As long as they were properly embalmed and are still preserved, this potion will bring them back." There was silence. "And Evan Thade ensures me that all of the dead have been properly embalmed," he added. It was Egan Ammon who spoke first. "You mean, with this potion, I would be able to bring Chloe back?" Chloe Ammon had died the previous year, just 1 week after her and Egan's 15th anniversary. "Well, this is preposterous," exclaimed R. "See? Goose. You don't really expect us to believe that you can revive the dead. That you've cured death. But I have. It's this potion right here," said Martin, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a little glass vial filled with a viscous vermilion liquid. Why, that looks exactly like cherry cough syrup," cried Goose. "I know it doesn't look like much, but it truly is a miracle potion," insisted Martin. "It's black magic, witchcraft," hissed Father Ludger. "I'll have no part in it, if it even works at all," scoffed R.C. Goose. "Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves," reasoned the mayor. "If what Martin tells us is true, this would certainly be a remarkable invention, one that we shouldn't just discount." "The devil's work," crowed Father Luger. "But perhaps we should see if it works." "Just see. We don't have to use it, but just see if it works," said Mildred. Cameron Ward cleared his throat and then nodded in agreement. "I'm with Mildred," said Egan Ammon. "We don't have to use it, just see." "What do you say, Mr. Mayor?" The 5 other town council members immediately turned to stare at Mayor Moon. He looked at Martin. You say this works, this potion as you call it. It revives the dead." It does. "Do you mind if we experiment before we attempt this?" asked the mayor. Martin shook his head. "I promise you won't be disappointed," said Martin. "I believe, if you want proof, I know where we can go." "Yes, do come in. All of you. My, there are a lot of you, aren't there? Watch for that." Evan Thade jumped to stop the fall of a glass jar. The jar, containing a hand suspended in green liquid, had been disrupted when the rotund frame of Egan Ammon bumped into a cupboard. "Formaldehyde," continued Thade. "You can never get it out." Ammon mumbled something in apology. "Besides," lamented Thady, "this hand has sentimental value to me. Please forgive us for barging in like this, Evan. We know you're probably busy." "This should only take a minute," said Mayor Moon, eyeing an unembalmed corpse lying on the table. "It was not anyone from the town." "Might I ask who?" "It's for practice," interrupted Thade, hurriedly covering the corpse with a sheet. Thad's lab was situated in a dimly lit stone cellar. The space had been used by the Thades to brew their own ale during Prohibition. From that time, 2 large copper vats remained, pushed into the corner. For several years, the Thade family had tried to remove the now useless vats. but they were too large to get out of any of the doors or windows in this space, which raised the question of how the vats were first brought to the basement in the first place. Thady had built 2 crude wooden cabinets. In one, he kept his various chemicals sorted by color and purpose. All the preservatives on one shelf, the sanitizers on another. In the second, he kept his utensils, various syringes, pumps, and a treasured Mary Kay makeup kit used to dress up the bodies for open casket funerals. Lining the cabinet tops were various morbid objects, books on death, assorted dark wooden boxes, mummy figurines, and the stuffed body of a raccoon. With the town council distracted by these objects, only Cameron Ward noticed what appeared to be a pile of small mouse bones piled up in the far corner of the room. "Yes, thank you, Evan, for letting me, use your space." Martin Gleinzer shook Evan Thady's hand. "Could you please get me the specimen?" Evan Thade went atop one of his cabinets and removed a small mahogany-paneled box. Evan put the box on the table. The 6 council members peered to view the box, as if by arching their necks, they would see what was inside. The box, however, was closed, and all they could see was the lid. On the lid, written in Evan's scraggled handwriting, was the name Edgar. "Open the box, Mr. Thady," said Martin, smiling with the feeling of someone who had practiced the line countless times in front of the mirror. Evan Thade did so. The box was lined with a rippling dark blue velvet. On the inside lay the lifeless body of a rat. The sleek fur was impossibly white, as if it had been completely untouched by anything, as if fingerprints would leave a blemish. Its eyes were closed, peacefully, but the red cornea was peeking through an almost imperceptible slit, a tiny, morbid sliver of ruby. "Mr. Thady, is this rat dead?" "Yes, Martin. He's most dead." At this point, the ceremony had to pause. Egan Emmon insisted on testing the rat's heartbeat for himself, and he ultimately concurred with Evan Thade's assessment. "All good." "That's one dead mouse," announced Ammon after his examination. "His name is Edgar," muttered the undertaker. "Yes, so as we have determined, the rat is dead," chirped Martin. "But as you can see, he picked up the vial and inserted into it an eyedropper. With Evan's assistance, they opened up the dead rodent's mouth and carefully applied 3 drops of the potion. "Now that we've applied the medicine, you wait just 1 second," said Martin. The rat was still. Then, after a moment, the nose twitched slightly. Then its right hind leg. In almost no time, the rat had turned over and scampered over to Evan, as he always used to do before his passing. Evan reached into his pocket and gave the rat a piece of cheese. Edgar, happily and harmlessly, nibbled on the square of cheddar. Evan stroked its head with his pinky finger. The council was silent, the exception being Egan Ammon, who gasped. Chloe can come back," Egan gaped. "It's a miracle," whispered Mildred Snipes. Cameron Ward was speechless. R.C. Goose looked at Father Todd Luger. "I don't believe it," said Goose. "I just don't believe it. Is it witchcraft, Father?" "Well, Father Todd Luger knew deep down that such a thing went against God. You live, you die, and then you were supposed to go into the afterlife. To bring people back would go against everything God had planned. And yet there was no denying this curiosity. A potion to bring back the dead was, no doubt, remarkable. And Father Todd Luger felt that perhaps it would be best if the church remained silent on this specific issue. "It is, and you believe this same potion can be used on people?" asked the mayor. "Absolutely. It's the same process. A life is a life. If it works for a rat, why not a human?" replied Martin, who looked at his shoes. "Well, could we say, test this out?" The mayor eyed the corpse under the sheet. "You don't want to bring this one back," warned Thade with a grim chuckle. "He killed 4 people a few counties over. Death penalty, Well, I use him for practice." "I see," said the mayor, quickly looking away from the sheet. "No, we wouldn't want to bring him back. perhaps, chimed Martin. Well, perhaps, if we were to bring just a few people back. A few that we would want to bring back. If it works on them, on this. Well, this test sample, then we can always do more. But who are these few people? Who would they be? Asked the mayor. Well, we have all of you here, the town council, said Thad. Martin Glinser agreed. Each of you could bring someone back, and Mayor Moon, you could decide if it's a success. Martin glanced at the townspeople. The mayor considered this. Yes, we could. Egon, you would bring back Chloe, I'm guessing. And Cameron'll bring back his crazy old mother, exclaimed Ammon. Cameron Ward said nothing. I could bring back Father Shanley, piped in Luger, referring to his predecessor at the church. R.C.E. Goose stared at the priest in amazement. You're on board with this. Well, it is intriguing, R.I.C. And when one thinks of it, is it really so terrible? If God has given Martin this potion, then perhaps he intends for us to use it. And besides, wouldn't you like to see Mark again? You are such a good team. See, Goose considered it. For years, he and Mark Lehman had been partners. Goose Lehman was the most lucrative business to have come out of Salazar in its entire history. The town's only export, coal, had been outdated for some time, being replaced by fancier forms of fuel. Yet Goose Lehman had a near monopoly on all of the coal in the state. So while business was slow, the pair did well enough to make by. Goose dealt with the personnel part of it, making sure they had willing customers, figuring out what was the lowest they could charge, and still make a profit. Then he'd double that number. Lehman dealt with the books. The two would split the profit 50-50 until Mark's untimely death last July. The business partners had been inseparable, each owing their success to the other. The sign on the door still read Goose Lehman, and not a church service went by where Goose did not at some point think of Mark. But I have nobody. Who could I bring back? Asked Mildred. Mildred Snipes had never been married, although there had been offers. For one reason or another, none of the offers had ever come to fruition. Mildred, instead of a husband, kept cats, many cats. She used to always take in the strays, care for them. Whenever anyone had a sick animal, they took it to Mildred. She was the closest the town came to having a veterinarian. Mayor Moon pointed out that if the potion could bring back a rat, or, as Martin claimed, a human, why not a cat? And so it was decided that Mildred would bring back her most recently deceased pet, a tabby named William. Tomorrow, then, we will meet in the cemetery and bring back our friends and family, said the mayor. Even my Chloe, offered Egan. Yes, Egan, of course. Your Chloe. Cameron Ward sat at home and stared at his vial of potion. He ran a freckled hand through his straw-blonde hair. He sighed. Here, take this, watch after it, it's yours, and be sure to bring it with you tomorrow, Martin had said down in the Thade cellar. Cameron removed his left sock and applied some topical ointment to the stumps where his 3 toes used to be. Blown off by a shotgun. The wound had mostly healed after all these years, but Cameron didn't care. He was still fearful of contracting gangrene on the foot, and besides, the ointment felt nice. It soothed any pain, massaged all of the tension out. The vial was on the table. Oh, Ma, he said to the empty room. According to Martin, each body that came back had full memory of its past life. In fact, memories would be more vivid. It would be as if the body came back reborn, refreshed, a brand new mind, full of the same old memories. Cameron's heart had seized. His mother, if the potion worked, might no longer be insane. Cameron went to the refrigerator and took out a beer. He always kept beer in the house in case there was company, as he himself rarely drank. He had always felt that if he were to drink, he'd become an alcoholic like his father. Oliver, all Cameron had ever known about his father was his name. He could never forget it. His father's first name was his own middle one, and that his dad had drunk himself to death, as his mother put it. When Cameron was a boy, his mother had instilled in him that even a drop of alcohol would eventually lead to an untimely death. But as he grew up, he learned this to not be true, that alcohol in moderation would not kill you, but he still felt an obligation to his mother not to drink. Such a dutiful son, everyone always said about Cameron Ward. And it was true. Cameron Ward had cared for his mother well after the breakdown, and while he gladly would have continued, the vial which held the magical potion to bring her back seemed to be taunting him. What if his mother came back and was not insane? And what if she remembered what had caused her mental breakdown? And what if she told people? Cameron felt his neck go clammy. He couldn't let this happen. Perhaps it was growing up with no father figure, as his mother had often reasoned, but Cameron had never been strong. And when he received the notice that his lottery number had come up in the draft, Cameron didn't know what to do. He couldn't go to war. The draft was an all-consuming entity, swarming through Cameron's life in his peaceful childhood town. But more importantly, there was his mother. With his father having died, he was the only man in his mother's life. Were he to die in the war, she'd have no one at all. It was with this reasoning that he had gone out back, picked up his dad's old shotgun, said a prayer, and blew off 3 of his own toes. When his mother heard the gunshot, she ran out into the yard weeping. She screamed and hugged her son. Cameron did not cry. "It's okay, Mom. It's going to be okay. They can't make me go to war now." Cecilia Ward looked down. She saw the smoke still trailing out of the wound, saw the shotgun in her son's hand, and Cameron's ever-stoic expression. "I see," she finally said. Cameron expected relief, perhaps even praise. After all, by sacrificing 3 toes, because he didn't even use anyway, he had ensured his own perfect safety. He would not abandon his mother as his father had done. But he could not have anticipated the look of shame and anguish in her eyes. A fly flew towards her, and she twitched to avoid it. And in that twitch, Cameron could see something within his mother snap. "No son of mine's a coward," she calmly seethed, and then walked into the house. Cecilia locked herself in her room, refusing all of the food and water Cameron attempted to bring her. Despite his best efforts, Cameron couldn't save his mother. He watched her wither away. Her mind, deprived of nourishment, shut down. Cameron found her one night, violently writhing on the bed near to death. He phoned the doctor, then fled, vowing not to return until the war had ended. When he finally did return to Salazar, he was surprised to find that he was greeted with a hero's welcome. Cecilia Ward told everyone her son had been dutifully serving in Vietnam. The doctors claimed she'd been so worried about him that she'd stopped eating, causing her to lose her mind. And so, she'd told everyone that her son was in the war, bravely fighting for the cause. She had forgotten the incident, and it was Cameron's belief that the story she had concocted was her mind protecting itself, her one solace once her mind had shut down. From what the doctors said, it would be best not to upset her, and so Cameron shyly went along, always shrugging off the praise, agreeing to his mother's story. In that way, he felt he could perhaps meet her expectations. And yet, Cameron Ward still felt guilty. Guilty enough to care for her for nearly 40 years. When she died, he'd thought he could breathe easy. His secret would never be out. But if she were to come back, what if she were to tell everyone? If she were to reveal Cameron's secret shame? This town, the people that Cameron had come to know, would they shun him as his own mother had? If the whole town rose up against him, Cameron even feared for his life. The vial taunted him. The red liquid looked just like the color of the lipstick Cecilia used to wear every Sunday when they went to church. Cameron took a sip of beer. In less than a minute, he'd finished the whole can. R.C. Goose, meanwhile, sat in the office of Goose Lehman. Business was done for the day, and had been for a while, but the stout businessman felt like it was where he needed to be at the moment. It had only been a year ago that RCC, Goose, last sat in the same office with Mark Lehman. The men had been business partners for 15 years at that point. It was evening, the curtains were drawn, and the only phone in the building was situated on the table in front of them. Layman yawned and glanced at his partner. "You're welcome to go home, you know," he told Goose, smiling wearily. "Not at all. You probably get lonely sitting here all alone each night." "True, but I'm used to it at this point. You never stay this late. I thought that my company would be a welcome change." Goose taunted, using his index finger to pick some stray chicken breast from between his bottom teeth. "Not at all. You know I enjoy your company." Layman nibbled on his fingernail. Goose stared at him for a while, then let out a guffaw. "I know, I'm just teasing you, Mark. Are they normally this late?" No. I don't know what's happened. The shipment normally gets in an hour ago." The pair certainly made a strange picture. Compared to Goose's plump figure, Layman's figure was incredibly gawky and angular. His gaunt face was accentuated by a pair of copper wire glasses which framed his eyes to look irate at any moment, and which harshly left red footsteps on the trunk of his nose. The Arizona humidity chapped his slender lips, and so his mouth was constantly covered in bits of dead skin. It was Layman's unofficial job to sit and wait for their customers to call and say the shipments had arrived. It required very little attention, simply the ability to pick up a phone. The train would get in, the distributor would pick up the coal and call the office. Lyman would warmly thank them for their business and go home for the night. Most shipments got in around 6. This one was nearly an hour late. "It's bad weather, I suspect," croaked Layman. "What was that?" "Sometimes, if there's bad weather. Then the shipment is delayed slightly." Is there bad weather often?" asked Goose. Sometimes. Sometimes the tracks get icy. The train can't get there in time. Does that affect it?" "Ice on the tracks. It can make the train go slower." "Yeah, it happens sometimes. Maybe that's what happened then." "Yes, maybe that's what happened then." "Yes, maybe." Layman seemed to be willing the phone to ring with his mind. His partner got up, strode to the pantry, and got 2 pieces of shortbread. He wolfed one down and gave the other to Layman, who tried to wave it away. "Goose put it on the table anyway. Eat it. You like shortbread." "No, thank you. Really, I'm fine." The truth was that Layman was hungry, and he did like shortbread. He just didn't like eating in front of people, and he was very conscious of Goose's eyes. Layman shook slightly. He picked up the shortbread and began to eat it. "You know, Mark, I don't know if it's ice on the tracks," said Goose, after Layman had finished. "Why not?" "Well, it just seems odd for there to be ice on the tracks in the middle of July is all. And this being Arizona, where we don't even get ice in winter usually. It doesn't seem like there'd be too much ice present on train tracks of otherwise. Seems to me. But the shipment was heading to Pennsylvania, and they do get ice on the track there sometimes." "It's possible, Mark, but it's still July. I don't think Pennsylvania gets ice on the track in July." "I guess not, RCE. "No, and since the shipment's so late, and it couldn't have been delayed because of ice on the track, it seems to me more likely that the order was never going to arrive. As if someone may have canceled the order." Lehman was quiet for a moment, refusing to meet Goose's glare. "What?" "RUC. You canceled the order. You canceled the order. You canceled the order." "No, I don't think you understand me." "I didn't cancel the order, Mark. But it seems to me that one partner would make more of a profit than 2. That if someone canceled the order and then shipped it off independently, they would keep all the profit, not have to split it. You see what I mean?" "Not really, RSC. Did you cancel the order, Mark?" Mark Layman wiped some crumbs from the side of his mouth. "QE mouth. I don't know what you're talking about." "Really? I don't. It's just delayed for some reason. Because it seems odd to me that they've not called yet, unless they're calling a different number, like your home number, like you told them to." Goose had gotten up and walked to the fireplace. "RCE, where is this coming from? You know I'd never. I don't like it when people double-cross me. The profits have been a bit light this month. Times are hard, REOC, which is the reason someone might try to do something like this. He grabbed a fire poker and walked towards Layman. No, RC, I can explain. They'll call. I know they'll call. Layman put his hands out to stop his advancing partner. I've never canceled any order. Granted, it had occurred to me, but I'd never for more than a second did I think about it. Never more than just 1 second. But I can't believe that, Mark. No, please, I didn't. Please let me explain. The blunt end of the poker collided with Layman's temple. He dropped impossibly fast, slumped over the coffee table, shortbread crumbs just barely visible on his unshaven face. Right in the spot, his head began to swell. Goose returned the poker to the fireplace, dragged his partner up the staircase. Not an easy task to do, given that neither of the businessmen were in the best of shape. Once at the top, Goose let his partner fall. And that would be how RC, Goose, would tell everyone he found the lifeless body of Mark Layman the next day when he came in for work. But that night, as he was about to leave the building, the phone began to ring. He picked it up, listened to the voice on the other line, and then thanked them, confirming that the coal order had come in. The man on the other end apologized for the delay. Goose put the phone down, uttered an apology of his own to the man at the bottom of the stairs, went home, and made a cup of tea. Now Goose sipped his cup of tea in that office, the vial in his pocket. He grasped it angrily. Tomorrow he was supposed to bring Mark back. His grasp tightened, willing the glass to disintegrate at his touch. It did not. The next morning, Father Luger walked to the cemetery, glass vial in hand. He hadn't slept. Thinking about the potion had kept him up. The potion left him more than a little confused. He had no idea how he was meant to respond to the whole thing. The whole thing was so biblical. The walking dead who wouldn't think of Jesus Christ, and how he would respond worried him. He knew himself to not be a smart man. He liked his routines, his unchanging habits of daily life. He had never been the most steadfast priest. In truth, he had his doubts about the whole Catholicism thing. As a boy, being a priest had felt natural to him. He loved the church building itself. The way the light was refracted by the stained glass windows, how the organ echoed in your eardrums. But, as Todd Luger had become more vested in his occupation, he found more and more inconsistencies. When he'd mentioned this to Father Shanley, he'd been told that all priests experienced doubts, but that one day they'd pass. Todd Luger was still waiting for them to, and now Martin Glinser's potion concerned him. Sure, he'd been intrigued at first, who wouldn't have been? But what if these corpses came back and said that there was nothing in the afterlife? That would cement his doubts. It would be proof that his whole life, not to mention his livelihood, was a sham. This would be bad enough. But even more worrying than that was the possibility that the dead would come back and say that God did exist, and that there was a heaven or a hell. It was the hell part that worried the priest. If this potion proved that hell existed, he knew he would end up there. Certain things, he felt, cannot be atoned, and stealing periodically from the church's collection plate was one of those things. At first, it had been just a couple of dollars here and there, and only when he needed the money to get by. But as Father Luger's frustration with his religion grew, he began stealing larger and larger sums. It became a compulsion, and while he never kept track of the full amount taken, taking money from an entire town of people every week for 2 years. He couldn't bring himself to imagine how much he had amassed. The only way he could live with himself was in trusting his doubts, trusting that he'd not end up in damnation for his crimes. But if those dead bodies came back and confirmed everything he'd once believed, then what would he do? It was weighing him down. "Morning, Father," called the jovial voice of Egan Ammon. "I'm guessing you're going to the same place I am." "Yes, Egan. I would imagine we are." "Father Legend, we are." Father Legger let the rose-cheeked man catch up. Ammon was slightly out of breath. "I'm glad I caught you, Father. I was wanting to say, "This potion, it would be something, wouldn't it?" The priest grunted in agreement. "Yes? Well, last night, as wonderful as it would be to see my Chloe again, and it would of course be wonderful, I kept thinking that maybe the dead should be dead after all. Would it be so much harm to let Chloe rest?" Amon looked at Father Luger hopefully. The priest stopped walking and stared at the retired string salesman. "You won't give her the potion?" "No. I mean, if this works, I suppose that someone would get the potion to her eventually, and I don't want to hurt Martin's feelings. That poor kid hasn't a friend in the world, and he worked hard on his potion, and, well, I didn't want to seem like I wasn't grateful for the favor." Ammon reached into his pocket and took out his vial. "So, last night I switched my potion out for some cough syrup in the medicine cabinet. The color, it's almost identical." Ammon smiled broadly. He'd had the idea the night before, and had immediately poured his actual potion on some dead plants he'd not gotten around to throwing away. The plants looked lovely now. It had not been a difficult decision to make. Although maintaining good public appearances, the Ammons had had a tumultuous and abusive relationship. Agan Ammon felt constantly berated. Chloe had called him a boorish git, bland as toast pig, and much worse. Chloe's death had been the greatest thing to have ever happened to the retired string salesman. Father Luger held Egan's vial. The color and texture inside were the same as his own. This is because that night, when Father Luger couldn't get to sleep, he too had gone to his medicine chest and replaced the potion with cherry cough syrup, as had Cameron Ward and R.C. Goose. And as too had Mildred Snipes, who realized that bringing back one of her cats might show what Evan Thade had missed in his poorly conducted autopsy. That pieces of each of her cat's fur and bone were missing, used to make yarn and buttons for her thriving clothing business. "I doubt the potion would have worked anyway," Todd Luger finally said as he and Egan approached the top of the hill. I don't understand why." Martin Glinzer heaved as his shovel scattered another pile of dirt into the ground. It had only been an hour ago when he had finally conceded that the townsfolk could all go home, that none of the dead of Saluzar would be reawakened that day. Now, Martin was helping Evan Thade put the coffins back in the ground. Taking the coffins out had been an ordeal, but Evan was adamant that all the dead be returned to their resting places before nightfall. The last thing he wanted was for someone to unwittingly fall into an open grave. Safety first. That had always been rule number one in the undertaker's household. No one will mind. Martin. They'll all forget about it in time. These are good people, simple townsfolk. Evan took a break from shoveling and wiped some sweat from his brow. Mayor Moon had denied Martin the funding needed to mass-produce the potion, citing that no one would want a potion that could only resurrect rats. At first, Martin had been distraught, pleading, but he had calmed down now. Standing over the open grave, listening to the rustling of dirt as it collided with the coffin top was peaceful, almost therapeutic. Well, maybe you could sell it to science labs. Bring their rats back from the dead, Evan offered. Or market it as fertilizer. But it works. We know it works. I know, Martin. Martin Glinzer absently brought his hand to his head and felt the sore wound. He winced and looked at his shovel. The shovel was caked in dirt, but the specks of burgundy were still more than visible on the metal spade. Evan had mentioned that the blood never had fully come out. You owe me a new shovel, he'd said, but Martin had not realized the full extent of the stain. It wasn't even that the stain was massive. It was just that the color was so intoxicating, so hypnotic, that one could not help but look at it. He stared at the red flecks, amazed to be staring at his own blood. To test the potion, he'd known he'd need to revive a human being, but he didn't want to endanger anyone's life in case the potion didn't work. So, 1 week earlier, he'd had Evan Thade kill him, hit him on the head with shovel, then feed him the potion. But why, Evan? I mean, why didn't it work? It worked on the rat. Every time, it worked on the rat. And I mean it worked on me. A good thing, too. Martin looked at the undertaker beside him. The inventor had never had many friends, and certainly not any close ones. But the bond that he and Evan had was unlike any other. Certainly, Evan felt it too. Their friendship had grown considerably since that day when Martin had first approached Evan, telling him about the potion. And when Martin had him conduct that final experiment, the first thing Martin had felt when he'd been revived and looked into Evan Thadde's face was that they had just shared the experience of Martin's death. And a connection like that couldn't be broken. Maybe they weren't meant to come back. It wasn't your time, so the potion worked on you. But the others, maybe Martin, there's a reason they needed to stay dead. The two men were silent for a moment. The corpses were perfect, Evan. Really, even after so much time, they looked as if they could have gotten up and walked around. Thank you. You're an artist, you know that. The undertaker thanked Martin and shoveled another heap of dirt into the grave. Everyone was so nice about it. Told me it was okay that they didn't mind, Martin continued. Mistakes are made, chap, Egan said. Evan laughed. Martin did a spot-on impression of Egan Ammon, like I said. These are good, simple townsfolk. You can't find any better people, salt of the earth, agreed Martin. They continued filling the hole with dirt, the sun slowly setting over Saluzar as the church bell struck 11. And when they were done, the simple country folk rested easy, comfortable in the fact that the dead would remain buried.